Today, we are taking a deep dive into the American workforce. We're going to use the recovery period right after the Great Recession as our lens to really understand the forces that shape your job, your paycheck, and, well, the entire U.S. economy.
Let's start with this idea from Henry Ford. It's over a century old, but it perfectly frames that classic dynamic between employers and employees, doesn't it? That core relationship between work and reward that really sits at the very heart of our economy. So this chart here shows a century of unemployment, and man, it's a real roller coaster of economic ups and downs. But here's the thing, the official numbers you hear on the news, they don't even begin to tell the whole story. We're about to show you what's really hidden just beneath the surface. Okay, here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the individual American worker. Then we'll look at how the workplace itself is changing, what your paycheck is truly worth, and what the real unemployment rate looks like. After that, we'll zoom out to see the government's role in all this and tackle the major challenges on the horizon. All right, first up, the American worker. We're talking about the people actually producing the goods and providing the services that make the U.S. economy go. Their story is incredibly important, especially when we look at that critical recovery period after the 2007 to 2009 Great Recession. So get this, in 2013, that number, 155.4 million people, represented the engine of the nation's economy. But here's a key trend you need to know. The percentage of people working or looking for work has actually been on a downward slide since its peak back in the late 90s. That's partly because of an aging population, but there are other complex things going on too.
So who are all these workers, and what are they actually doing every day? Well, the answer to that has changed a lot. Over the last few decades, we've seen this massive shift from an economy built on making stuff to one built on providing services. And this chart just shows it so clearly. You see this huge split, right? Look at that top line. That's service-providing jobs. It absolutely soared from 50 million in 1980 to nearly 98 million by July 2014. And meanwhile, the bottom line, goods-producing jobs, pretty much just stagnated. This is the shift that completely remade the American workplace. So what does this service economy actually look like in practice? Well, this chart breaks it all down for us. As you can see, professional and business services, that's the biggest piece of the pie. It's followed by retail, healthcare, and local government. And get this, these top 5 sectors alone made up over 75 million jobs. Okay, now let's talk about something that hits home for every single one of us, your paycheck, and more importantly, what it's actually worth. To really get a handle on your earnings, you have to understand this one crucial difference. Current dollars, that's just the number you see on your pay stub. But real dollars, that's what you can actually go out and buy with your money after you factor in inflation. So think about it. If your salary goes up 2%, but the price of everything else goes up 3%, you've actually lost ground. This table tells such an interesting story. If you just look at the current dollars column, you see this nice steady climb. Looks great on the surface, right? But now, shift your eyes over to the 1982 $84 column. That's the measure of real purchasing power. And what does it do? It bounces around, it stays flat. It shows that for many, many years, American workers just weren't really getting ahead. And that right there is the key takeaway. You can get a raise and still be falling behind. Take 2012, for example. Average weekly earnings went up 1.9% in current dollars. But after you account for inflation, real earnings, your actual buying power, actually dropped by 0.2%. And this whole problem of shrinking purchasing power, it's right at the center of the debate over the federal minimum wage. See, at the time this data was gathered, the minimum wage had been stuck at $7.25 an hour since 2009. That means every single year, its real value was just getting eaten away by inflation. But raising the minimum wage isn't some simple fix. A 2014 report from the Congressional Budget Office really laid out the trade-offs. On one hand, a higher wage could pull hundreds of thousands of families out of poverty. But on the other, it could also lead to job losses. It's a perfect example of the really tough balancing act that comes with making economic policy. Now, beyond what you're paid, the other huge number you're always hearing about is the unemployment rate. But just like with paychecks, the headline number you see on the news, well, it doesn't tell the whole story. There's a whole hidden picture we need to uncover. And this leads us to a really critical question. What if the official unemployment rate just completely misses millions of people who are out there struggling to find a job? The way we answer that has massive implications for how we see the real health of the job market. So here it is, the headline number from July 2014, 6.2%. This is the official unemployment rate, what economists call the U3 rate. It basically represents the total number of people officially counted as unemployed as a slice of the total labor force.
But to get a much fuller picture, the Bureau of Labor Statistics adds a few other groups back in. First, you have discouraged workers. These are people who've just given up looking. Then you add others who are marginally attached. They want a job but haven't looked recently. And finally, you add in the millions who are working part-time simply because they can't find full-time work.
And when you add all those people back into the mix, you get this number, 12.2%. That's the U6 rate. And in July 2014, it was nearly double the official number. It gives you a much broader and, frankly, a much more honest measure of what's called labor underutilization, all the people who aren't working to their full potential in the economy. Okay, so we've seen the reality on the ground for individual workers. Now let's zoom all the way out to that 30,000-foot view and see what levers the government can actually pull to try and manage this incredibly complex economic machine. First things first, where does the government get its cash? Well, in fiscal year 2013, 47% of all federal revenue came from individual income taxes. Another 34% came from payroll taxes for things like Social Security. You add that up, and that's a whopping 81% of all federal revenue coming directly out of workers' paychecks. Now, to steer the economy, the government basically has two big toolkits. On one side, you've got fiscal policy. That's Congress and the president making decisions on taxing and spending. Think of it like them turning a big spending dial up or down. On the other side is monetary policy. That's the Federal Reserve, and they're kind of like the economy's thermostat, controlling interest rates and the money supply to either cool things down or heat things up. And finally, let's look ahead. The data from this period really points to some pretty significant long-term challenges on the horizon, especially when you start talking about the national debt and the future of our biggest social programs. Just think about this for a second. Projections from 2014 showed that Social Security's main trust fund, the one supporting millions of retirees, was on track to run out of reserves by 2033. Now you couple that demographic pressure with a rising national debt, and you're left with this huge, critical, unanswered question. The whole economic story we've been exploring today, from wages and jobs to government policy, it all leads to this one fundamental challenge. How do we make sure we have a prosperous and secure future for the next generation of American workers?